I raised my son with these hands, stitching cloth by day and hope by night. And when his bride mocked my old dress and called me a burden, I said nothing, but God heard my silence. Because one day the same hands she scorned were the ones the whole city stood up to honor. The first light of Charleston crept through lace curtains, tracing patterns over a table covered in threads, scissors, and dreams. Margaret Maggie Cy J. Her H. This set of hand-embroidered linens wasn't just fabric. It was love translated into cotton and patience. 2 months of midnight work. Her gift for her son's engagement, Jacob the Day's steam, rose from her iron as if blessing the cloth. She pressed the final fold, flat whispered, "For you, my boy," and slid the bundle into a white box tied with navy ribbon, the same navy as the dress she'd saved 3 months' pension to buy, modest, pressed to perfection. The color of Dign. Outside the city, hummed awake horse hooves, on cobblestone distant church bells, the scent of salt from the harbor. Maggie placed her mother's pearls on her ears, the same she wore the day Jacob was born. Her reflection smiled back, lined proud and just a little fright. For a moment she imagined Curtis, her late husband, beside her, saying the words he always did before church. "You've got class, Maggie. Real class." The camera lingers on her walking down Meeting Street. Linen box in hand, unaware that before sunset, that same box would lie forgotten under a banquet table, and her heart would begin to change forever. By 7:30, Charleston already glimmered under a pale gold sun. Maggie's navy dress caught the light as she waited at the bus stop on Calhoun Street, white box of linens pressed to her chest. Her smile was small but stubborn, the kind of smile built from decades of holding herself together. Then the radio on a passing truck broke the peace traffic alert: major collision on the Ravenel Bridge. Both lanes closed. Expect heavy delays. The words landed like pins through fabric. The bridge, her only direct route to the Whitaker estate. The bus driver sighed. "Ain't no crossin' that bridge today, ma'am. You'll need to go round through West Ashley." Maggie hesitated. The longer road meant an hour's detour. Still, she thanked the driver, adjusted her shoes, and began walking. The sun climbed higher, heat blooming through the fabric of her dress. She passed tourists with cameras, the smell of pralines drifting from a candy shop, laughter echoing from rooftop cafes. To everyone else, it was a Saturday of leisure. For her, it was the most important morning of her life, slipping away minute by minute. At a corner store, a boy offered to call her a cab. "No need, sweetheart," she said, though her ankles burned. "I've walked through worse storms than this." Finally, a yellow cab slowed the driver, waving her in. "Heading to Magnolia Key?" he asked. Maggie nodded, fanning herself with trembling fingers. As the taxi crossed the narrow streets toward the gardens, the clock on the dashboard ticked past 11. She didn't yet know that her delay would place her behind the hedges, at the very moment laughter turned cruel, and her heart would learn what silence really costs. By the time the taxi stopped at the Whitaker Garden Estate, the Charleston air had turned syrup thick. Strings of white roses hung from archways. Champagne glasses sparkled like tiny suns. Laughter floated above the music, light, rehearsed, expensive. Maggie paid the driver, adjusted the navy ribbon on her linen box, and followed the faint sound of a violin through the garden's side path. The main entrance was crowded, so she took the shortcut near the bougainvillea hedge, her heels crunching the gravel. Then she froze. Beyond the hedge, 3 women stood by a marble bench, all in pastel silk. One voice, clear, sharp, familiar. "Thank goodness she's not here yet," Sloane said, her laughter bubbling. "Can you imagine? She'd tell everyone how hard she worked to afford her dress. I swear everything's a tragedy with her." The second voice joined in, soft and poisonous. "Mothers-in-law are like that, always needing to prove they matter." The third woman chuckled. At least she won't ruin the photos with those outdated clothes. Bless her heart. For a long moment, Maggie couldn't breathe. The words seemed to hum against her skin, sinking in like thorns. Her pulse roared in her ears. The linens trembled in her hands, the work of 60 nights, suddenly weightless, meaningless. She could have walked away. She could have dropped the box and left. Instead, she took one step forward, smoothing her dress with trembling fingers, whispering her late husband's phrase like a prayer. "You've got class, Maggie. Real class." Then she lifted her chin, wiped the corner of her eye, and walked into the garden through the sunlit archway, smiling as if her heart hadn't just cracked in half. The sunlight spilled through crystal chandeliers as Maggie stepped under the archway, her smile stitched carefully across her face. The crowd shimmered, linen suits, pastel dresses, crystal flutes catching the Charleston light. Mom Jacob's voice cut through the noise. He rushed toward her, warmth and relief in every step. He hugged her tight, his cologne rich with youth and success. "I thought something happened. You okay?" She nodded, brushing a tear before it could fall. "Just a little traffic, sweetheart. But I made it." Sloane appeared perfect in champagne silk, a glass of rosé poised like a prop. "Oh, Mrs. Cole, what a shame you missed the ceremony. It was beautiful." Her smile gleamed, but her eyes didn't. Maggie lifted the white box. "I brought something for you both. I made it myself." Jacob opened it proudly. "You embroidered all this, Mom? They're amazing." Sloane bent closer, fingers grazing the fabric as if it might stain her manicure. "That's very thoughtful," she murmured, placing the linens under the table beside the catering trays. The moment passed like a quiet blade. Maggie's gaze drifted around the room, laughter everywhere, waiters gliding like ghosts. Sloane's friends filming slow-motion champagne pours for their stories. She stood among them, invisible but glowing inside her own resolve. Every wrinkle on her hands told a truth none of them could photograph. She lifted her glass of water, whispered beneath her breath, "To love, even when it hurts." No one heard. But the camera did, catching the faint shimmer in her eyes, the dignity of a woman refusing to let shame rewrite her worth. The string quartet played a lively waltz as waiters weaved through the glittering crowd. The air smelled of champagne and jasmine laughter rising like bubbles in a glass. Maggie sat near the back of the ballroom, too close to the service door, too far from her son's table. From where she sat, she could see Jacob and Sloane at the head table, their hands intertwined, camera flashes bursting around them like tiny fireworks. Pride glowed in her chest, but it burned too. The kind of burn that came from standing outside a window, watching a world that used to be yours. She reached down to check her box of linens, wanting to remind herself it was still there, still part of this day. But before her hand found it, a young waiter, rushing with a tray of hors d'oeuvres, stumbled. His foot caught the edge of the white box. It toppled, the ribbon snapping, embroidered sheets spilling onto the polished floor. For a heartbeat, no one noticed. Then came the laughter, soft at first, then growing. "Oh no, what's that?" "Someone's package fell, careful, it's underfoot." Maggie moved before anyone else. She knelt, gathering each sheet, with trembling hands pressing out invisible wrinkles with her palms. Her knees ached against the marble, but she didn't flinch. The music blurred. The laughter turned to a dull roar. Across the room, Sloane's friends watched, whispering behind manicured hands. "She's still doing it herself," one murmured. "Always performing the martyr," another said. Jacob half rose confused, but Sloane tugged his sleeve lightly, murmuring, "Let the staff handle it." Maggie folded the linens again. Perfect corners, perfect silence. A single thread hung loose from one edge. She bit it off with her teeth, tied it, and tucked it under. Then she stood, box in her arms, chin high. The light caught her pearls. For a moment, she looked regal. The kind of woman life could bruise but never break. She whispered almost to herself, "Nothing's ruined. Not the work, not the heart." A waiter approached, stammering apologies, but Maggie smiled softly. "Don't worry, dear. Just keep the music playing." And as she sat back down unseen among the sequins and chatter, the camera held her face still shining and infinitely strong. By the time dessert arrived, the ballroom had dissolved into glitter and noise. The band had switched to a jazzy rhythm. Couples danced beneath chandeliers that shimmered like bottled lightning. Maggie sat perfectly still. Her linen box rested safely beside her chair, now refolded, tied again with its ribbon. No one had asked about it. No one had noticed when she'd knelt on the marble floor. She glanced toward Jacob, who was laughing with Sloane's father near the champagne fountain. He looked so grown, so radiant, that for a fleeting moment, pride drowned the pain. He's happy, she told herself. That's all that should matter. A waiter offered her coffee. She smiled and declined. The pearls at her ears felt heavier than they ever had. Near midnight, as laughter peaked and the younger guests filmed dances for their feeds, Maggie rose quietly. Her chair barely made a sound. She slipped her cardigan over her shoulders, picked up the white box, and walked toward the terrace. Outside, Charleston glittered beyond the iron gate lanterns, swaying cicadas, singing the smell of gardenia, thick in the warm air. Behind her, the music thumped muffled by distance like a heart she no longer shared. She crossed the stone path to the curb. No taxis, no goodbyes. Only the slow echo of her heels against the cobblestones. Halfway down Meeting Street, she paused beneath a gas lamp. The light framed her face in gold and shadow. For the first time that night, she let the mask slip. Her breath shuddered. One tear traced a path through her foundation. Then she whispered, "You did good, Curtis." He turned out fine. The camera pulls wide, a solitary figure walking through the empty streets, blue dress moving in the humid breeze, the white box held close like a wounded heart. She refuses to drop. Behind her, faintly, the music fades, leaving only the rhythm of her footsteps and the slow, steady beat of a woman learning to walk alone again. Morning crept softly through the lace curtains, turning the small kitchen pale gold. The party's glitter had faded, replaced by the quiet tick of the wall clock and the faint smell of starch from yesterday's pressed dress. Maggie sat at her sewing table, still wearing the same pearl earrings. Her reflection in the oval mirror looked older today, not from time, but from truth. She opened a small, worn notebook from the drawer. Its cover was frayed, the pages filled with neat handwriting and dollar signs. Ethan's down payment, $400 this month. Sloane's bridal shower gift, $120. Dress fabric, blue silk, 3 weeks savings. Every number was a memory disguised as math. Every line told the story of a mother who had quietly built her son's dreams, stitch by stitch. Her fingers stopped on a page marked with a folded receipt, $8,000, the full total she'd given across 2 years. She smiled faintly, remembering his voice, "Mom, when we get the house, it'll be your home too." But last night, standing among chandeliers and strangers, she had realized that promise was only words. The mirror caught her eyes again. Wrinkles traced maps of endurance. Her hands, spotted and rough, looked foreign on the white paper. Then she closed the ledger, gently tied it with a ribbon, and whispered, "No more counting." Outside, Charleston's church bells rang in the distance, calm, solemn, certain. She rose, poured herself coffee, and for the first time in years didn't prepare extra cups just in case Jacob stopped by. There was no bitterness, only a deep, dawning clarity that love didn't mean disappearing to make others shine. By late morning, the Charleston heat had returned, crawling through the open window. Maggie was still at her kitchen table when a familiar knock tapped on the screen door. "Girl, you awake, or you stitching your way through heartbreak?" It was Delia Grant, 70 years old. Silver curls and the bluntness of someone who'd seen too much to bother with politeness. She carried 2 cups of sweet tea and a newspaper tucked under her arm. Maggie smiled faintly. "You heard already, baby, this city's smaller than it pretends to be." Delia sat down, squinting. "So, tell me how the rich folks treated you." Maggie hesitated, then said softly, "Like I was an old tablecloth they didn't order." For a moment, silence. Then Delia reached across the table, her palm warm and firm. "You've been sewing beauty for other people your whole life. Maybe it's time you sew some for yourself." Maggie laughed, the sound thin and brittle. "At my age?" "At your wisdom," Delia corrected. "You remember the church hall on Trad Street? They've been trying to start a craft class. You could teach embroidery, those fancy heirloom stitches folks around here lost decades ago." Maggie shook her head. "No one wants to learn from an old widow who still irons napkins by hand." "Then prove them wrong," Delia said. "Name it something elegant, something Charleston. Low country heirloom linens, maybe." She took a sip of tea. "Honey, people pay for authenticity now. You've got it by the spool." The words lingered in the humid air. Maggie looked toward the corner where her sewing machine sat silent, a spool of pale gold thread glinting in the sun. For the first time since the wedding, her fingers itched to create again, not for approval, but for peace. "Low country heirloom linens," she repeated, testing the rhythm like a prayer. Delia smiled. "See, it even sounds like a fresh start." And right then, something small but certain stirred inside Maggie like the first stitch of a brand new design pulling thread through torn fabric. Saturday morning arrived with the smell of magnolia and dust. Maggie stood outside St. Bartholomew's Parish Hall, clutching a basket of thread spools, folded linen squares, and her courage. A handwritten sign taped to the door read, "Low Country Heirloom Linens. Free intro class. Beginners welcome." Her name was scribbled below in blue ink letters, neat but small, like she was still afraid to take up space. Inside the room was washed in fluorescent light and silence. 6 metal chairs, 2 long folding tables. The clock ticked too loudly. She laid out the sample pieces she'd stitched the night before. Tiny magnolia flowers, oyster shell spirals, initials entwined in vines. Art that spoke of Charleston's soil and salt. For 5 minutes, no one came. Then the door creaked. A young mother peeked in, holding a toddler on her hip. "Is this the sewing class I saw the post at the grocery store?" "Yes, come on in," Maggie said, her voice shaking but kind. Soon after, an older man wandered in. "My late wife used to sew. Figured I'd learn too." Then 2 teenage girls giggling, a retired nurse, and finally, a college art student with turquoise hair. 6 chairs, 6 souls. Maggie inhaled. "All right then," she said, threading a needle. "Let's make something that'll last longer than we do." At first, her hands trembled so badly she pricked her finger. The sight of the tiny drop of blood on white linen almost broke her composure. Then the little boy at the end table clapped and whispered, "Pretty lady." The room softened. Laughter fluttered through like a warm breeze. "Don't worry about mistakes," Maggie said. "Mistakes just make the story visible." She demonstrated the low country cross-vine stitch, her late mother's signature pattern. Cameras could never capture what happened next. Close-ups of fingers fumbling cloth, tightening in hoops. Sunlight, slipping through blinds and landing on thread like liquid gold. One by one, they leaned forward, watching, learning, listening. For 2 hours, the hum of conversation replaced the hum of her old loneliness. The parish smelled faintly of starch soap and beginning again. When the clock struck noon, Maggie looked up and the hall wasn't empty anymore. Every chair was taken. 2 new faces stood by the door watching shyly. "Sorry we saw folks through the window. Can we join next week?" Maggie blinked, almost laughing from disbelief. "Of course, darlin'. Bring a hoop and a willing heart." As the class ended, the young mother lingered. "Miss Maggie," she said, tracing the edge of her linen flower, "I didn't think my hands could make something this pretty." Maggie smiled, eyes glistening. "They can do even more. Beauty's just the proof you were patient." When everyone left, she gathered the scraps and threads into her basket. The sunlight pouring through the church windows seemed different now, gentler, brighter, as if the city itself had exhaled with her. She whispered, "You see, Curtis, they came." The camera pulled back, showing Maggie alone at the long table surrounded by scattered bits of color and hope, tiny glowing islands against the pale floor. Outside, bells rang for noon mass echoing across the river. Inside, a 68-year-old seamstress finally felt the sound of her own life beginning again. By Monday morning, the church hall still smelled faintly of starch and thread oil. Maggie returned to tidy up, humming under her breath, still half disbelieving that anyone had shown up at all. The sunlight stretched across the wooden floor, catching the shimmer of golden thread left behind from Saturday's class. She bent to pick up a fallen spool when the creak of the front door startled her. A woman stood there, tall, elegant, in a linen suit the color of sea foam. Her heels made no sound on the floorboards. She wasn't from this neighborhood. You could tell by the quiet confidence in her posture. "Excuse me," the woman said, her accent. "Pure Charleston upper crust. I was dropping off flyers for an event and saw your sign. May I?" "Of course," Maggie said, wiping her hands on her apron. The woman crossed the room, fingers tracing one of the finished samplers, magnolia blooms stitched in soft ivory and green. Her hand paused on the edge, eyes narrowing, not in judgment, but in recognition. "This is remarkable work," she murmured. "Not factory perfect alive." "Who did this?" "I did," Maggie said simply. The woman smiled, a small curve of genuine admiration. "Avery Shaw," she said, offering a card. "General Manager, Magnolia Key Resort. We're planning a Southern Heritage Gala next month. You might be just what we're looking for." Maggie blinked, uncertain whether she'd heard right. "Your pieces have a voice," Avery continued, "and Charleston loves a story." When the door closed behind her, Maggie turned the card over in her hand, her pulse quickening. The embossed gold letters glowed under the light. For the first time in years, possibility felt real, and it had her name on it. 2 weeks after the first class, Charleston's early summer light poured through Maggie's kitchen window as she sipped her coffee. The house smelled faintly of lavender starch and the faint sweetness of thread wax. On her phone, a notification blinked. Sloane Whitaker posted a new photo. Out of habit, Maggie opened it. There it was, the garden engagement party, framed in gold filters. Every detail perfect: the roses, the string lights, the linen-covered tables she had ironed by hand that morning. And there, half hidden under a plate of champagne flutes, were her embroidered napkins. The same magnolia vine design she had spent 60 nights sewing, the same ones she'd retrieved from the marble floor. Her breath caught. The caption read, "Southern Chic Minimalism." So grateful for all the designers who made this vision come alive. Charleston style, magnolia moments. The comments poured in like glitter. "Absolutely stunning. Where did you get those linens? The detailing is unreal perfection." But beneath it, Sloane hadn't tagged her. Not even a mention. Maggie stared at the screen until her eyes blurred. She didn't cry this time, just sat still, the silence pressing against her ribs. Then she locked the phone, set it face down, and stared at her coffee until it went cold. A knock on the door broke the stillness. Delia burst in, brandishing her own phone like a weapon. Did you see this nonsense? She took credit for your work. Maggie smiled faintly. She didn't take credit. She just forgot who made it. Baby, forgetting kindness is worse than stealing it, Delia said, sitting down hard. What you gonna do? Comment, call her out? Maggie shook her head. No, I'm done begging people to see me. I'd rather show them. She stood, opened the cabinet, and pulled out her notebook, the same one that used to hold family expenses. Now she turned to a clean page. Across the top, in careful script, she wrote, Order log, Low Country heirloom linens. Delia blinked. You mean I'm taking commissions, Maggie said quietly. No discounts, no pity orders, just honest work, honest pay. Delia grinned, fierce as a sunrise. Now that's the Maggie I know. Later that night, Maggie sat at her sewing table scrolling past Sloane's glittering photos. She opened a new document on her phone, Our Low Country heirloom linens. The first post was a simple close-up, her wrinkled hands tying a knot of gold thread. The caption read, Heritage isn't old-fashioned, it's hand-stitched. Within an hour, 3 likes appeared, then 10. A message followed from a stranger. Do you take custom orders? Maggie exhaled, smiling to herself. Across town, Sloane laughed over wine with her friends, basking in the glow of her own post. None of them noticed the single napkin still in her trunk, the one corner embroidered with tiny intertwined initials, J+S, stitched with a mother's hands. The camera lingered there as soft piano notes filled the frame, 2 worlds spinning in opposite directions, one of filtered light and applause, the other of quiet, unstoppable creation. And for the first time, Maggie didn't envy the noise. She preferred the sound of her own needle steady and sure, writing her truth one thread at a time. By the next morning, Maggie's dining table had transformed into an office. The lace tablecloth was gone. In its place sat a stack of linen samples, a thrifted laptop, and a printed spreadsheet she didn't entirely understand yet. She took a breath and uncapped her pen. At the top of a clean sheet, she wrote in calm, looping letters, Price list, Low Country heirloom linens. For years, she'd said yes to everything to neighbors who asked for free repairs to brides who wanted a little embroidery as a favor to Sloane's endless aesthetic experiments. But this morning, the word no felt sacred. She sipped her coffee, thinking of Delia's voice. Don't discount your own worth, baby. Even kindness needs a boundary. So she wrote carefully, line by line, custom napkins, $45 per set. Table runner, $120. Wedding embroidery custom initials heirloom stitch, $300 flat. Each number looked bolder than the last. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was proving something to herself. Next, she rehearsed her lines in the mirror, soft but firm. Thank you for your interest. I'd love to collaborate, but my rates are fixed. No, I'm afraid I can't offer unpaid samples. The reflection that looked back wasn't timid anymore. Still humble, yes, but grounded. Her late husband's words echoed faintly. You've got class, Maggie. Real class. She smiled at the thought, typed her name into a new email signature. Margaret Cole, owner Low Country heirloom linens, and hit save. Outside, the church bells began to ring noon. She turned toward her sewing table where new fabric waited glowing in the sunlight. This time, every stitch would carry a price, not out of greed, but out of respect for the decades that had gone unpaid. The camera lingered as she threaded her needle-steady hands, quiet heart, a woman rebuilding her life not through miracles, but through method. A week later, Maggie stood before the gleaming glass facade of Magnolia Key Resort, the kind of place she'd only ever seen in bridal magazines. The Atlantic breeze carried hints of salt and jasmine, lifting the hem of her navy skirt. In her hands, a portfolio wrapped in twine and faith. Inside, everything gleamed: marble floors, brass fixtures, orchids glowing under soft white lights. The concierge smiled at her badge. Ms. Margaret Cole, Magnolia. Heritage Gala proposal correct. She nodded, steadying her breath. He led her through corridors lined with photographs of Charleston's social history, debutante balls, church fundraisers, ladies in wide hats under magnolia trees. The air smelled of money and memory. When the conference room doors opened, Avery Shaw was already there, poised, confident, radiating calm authority in a cream suit. "Mrs. Cole," she said warmly, "I'm glad you came." "I almost didn't," Maggie admitted, setting her samples on the table. "Places like this? They have a way of reminding me where I don't belong." Avery's smile softened. "Maybe that's exactly why you should be here." Maggie unfolded the linens one by one. Magnolia vines, oyster shell spirals, low country cross stitches shimmering in pale gold. These are all hand-embroidered. No machines. Every piece tells a Charleston story. Avery ran her fingers across the fabric. "We're hosting a gala next month, a heritage theme. We need linens that speak history. 30 custom table runners and napkins to match. Do you think you could handle that?" Maggie's throat tightened. 30. For her, it was a mountain. But she nodded. "If it's worth doing, I'll find a way." Avery smiled. "That's what I like to hear." She turned toward the wall, gesturing at a framed black and white photo. "We keep that picture as a reminder of Charleston craftsmanship, a woman who sewed the governor's inauguration gown back in 1964. Maggie followed her gaze. The photo showed an older black seamstress bent over white satin needle, glinting eyes fierce and focused. Her name etched below, Iris Whitaker, Master Tailor, 1964. Maggie's breath caught. "Whitaker, yes," Avery said, not noticing her tremor. "One of Charleston's finest. Her work's in the local museum. I've always admired her. The precision, the humility." Maggie stared at the picture. The lines on Iris's hands, the curve of her shoulders. They looked exactly like her own. The name echoed in her head like a bell. Whitaker. Sloane's name. A cold realization crept up her spine. Iris wasn't just a legend, she was family. The very family that had laughed behind a hedge and called Maggie outdated. Avery continued, oblivious to the revelation. "People forget it was women like her who made Charleston beautiful. I'd like our gala to remind them." Maggie's voice came out soft, reverent. "Yes, ma'am." "I think she'd like that." As Avery handed her the contract, Maggie's eyes lingered once more on the photograph. Iris Whitaker's expression seemed almost alive, proud, knowing, defiant. Under the fluorescent light, Maggie whispered, "I'll make you proud too." When she stepped out of Magnolia Key, the sunlight hit her face like a benediction. The seagulls cried overhead. The city shimmered across the harbor. She clutched the folder to her chest. 30 table runners, one impossible task, and a secret thread tying her fate to the very people who once dismissed her. In that moment, Maggie didn't just feel like a seamstress. She felt like history, reaching back through time, needle in hand, ready to stitch her name where it had always belonged. That evening, Maggie sat at her kitchen table long after sunset, staring at her phone screen. She had typed the name 3 times into the search bar, Iris Whitaker, seamstress, Charleston, 1964. A headline appeared, "Living Heritage, the Last Master Tailor of Charleston." The article ended with a line that made Maggie's pulse stutter. Now 96. Ms. Whitaker resides at St. Anne's Home for Retired Artisans. The next morning she went. St. Anne's sat on the edge of the city, where moss-draped oaks bent low over brick paths. The hall smelled faintly of rosewater and starch. A nurse led her to a sunroom filled with quilts and soft light. And there she was. Iris Whitaker, small, but unbowed, her silver hair braided tight, a needle still dancing between her fingers. Maggie hesitated at the doorway. "Ms. Whitaker, I saw your photograph at Magnolia Key." Your work, it's extraordinary." The older woman smiled without looking up. "That old thing, stitchin', kept my hands young, even when the world didn't care." Maggie stepped closer. On Iris's lap lay a square of linen magnolia vines, curling around a single gold thread, the same cross-vine pattern Maggie's mother had taught her. Her voice cracked. "Who showed you that stitch?" my Mama Iris said softly. "Passed it to me when I was 12. Said every vine's a prayer growin' reachin', never dyin'." Tears blurred Maggie's vision. My mother said the same words. Iris finally looked up. Their eyes met two women separated by decades, but bound by thread. A silence bloomed gentle and holy. Iris chuckled faintly. "Guess we've been sewing the same story all along, haven't we?" Maggie nodded, unable to speak. As she left St. Anne's, the morning sun hit her face through stained glass windows, shaped like magnolias. She whispered, "Then maybe this time it's my turn to finish the pattern. 3 weeks, 30 table runners, 1 pair of hands." When Maggie signed the Magnolia Key contract, she hadn't realized how long 30 runners could stretch or how many hours a 68-year-old spine could endure before screaming. But once she started, she didn't stop. Her kitchen became a battlefield of beauty bolts of ivory linen stacked like Fort Walls bowls of thread, sorted by shade, an old metronome ticking in the corner to keep her pace. Every morning before dawn, she brewed coffee strong enough to wake ghosts and began to stitch under a single lamp. The first week, her rhythm was pure faith, thread, knot, pull, breathe. The radio hummed old jazz, and she pretended Curtis was still alive, teasing her about her stubborn perfection. By day 6, her fingertips were punctured with tiny red moons. Still, she kept sewing. When Delia stopped by, she gasped, "Girl, you're making a factory out of this kitchen." Maggie smiled weakly. Factories don't pray between stitches. Delia rolled up her sleeves. "Then tonight, you got 2 praying hands." They worked through the night, the clock hands crawling like tired needles. Candlelight flickered on the walls, and soft gospel played from Delia's phone. Each finished runner joined the stack, with reverence 30 names slowly forming in cloth, each one whispering, "Iris, Curtis, Grace, Maggie." But by the second week, exhaustion struck. Maggie woke one dawn with her hand locked in a cramp, her eyes swollen. When she tried to thread the needle, it slipped from her trembling fingers. "I can't do this," she whispered to the empty room. "I'm too old for miracles." The linen in her lap blurred. Tears spotted the fabric like rain. Then she heard it faint, echoing from her memory. "You've got class, Maggie. Real class." She exhaled, straightened her shoulders, and began again. From that day, she adjusted her pace slower, smarter. Delia brought homemade balm for her fingers, and even 2 of her sewing students volunteered to help learning each delicate crossvine stitch under her supervision. The class became a chorus of quiet determination. By the final week, the runners filled her home. Ivory paths shimmering in the sunlight, magnolia vines curling like living gold. When she laid the last one flat, dawn was breaking outside, the sky painted the same soft pink as her thread. She pressed her palm to the finished cloth, whispering, "You see, Iris, we did it." Then she turned off the lamp, the metronome finally still. The camera pulled back the kitchen, glowing with completed work steam rising from untouched coffee. Maggie asleep in her chair, needle still between her fingers, like a sword laid down after battle. The last thing we hear before the fade-out is the faint hum of morning doves and the sound of fabric breathing in triumph. The night of the Magnolia Heritage Gala shimmered like a dream spun in gold. The ballroom at Magnolia Key glowed under chandeliers shaped like magnolia blossoms. Strings played slow, honey-thick jazz, while waiters glided with silver trays and smiles rehearsed for donors and debutantes. Maggie stood near the service doors, wearing her best navy dress pearls, polished hands trembling only slightly. She wasn't here as a guest, not exactly. Avery had insisted she attend as our featured artisan. Across the room, her runners gleamed on every table, each magnolia vine curling like living poetry. Guests bent close to trace the stitches. Their voices floated through the air, admiration wrapped in southern politeness. Exquisite work. Did you see the hand detail? They say it was done by a local seamstress. And then Maggie saw her Sloane, radiant in silver silk, her arm looped through Jacob's. The couple moved through the crowd like a magazine spread, elegant, invincible, unbothered. Sloane's gaze swept the tables, then froze. Her manicured hand touched one of the runners. "Oh," she murmured to a friend, "they used my design inspiration from our wedding." Maggie's throat tightened, but she stayed silent. She'd promised herself no bitterness tonight, just truth. Avery's voice rang from the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, before dinner, we wish to honor a woman whose hands carry Charleston's history in every thread. Please welcome the creator of tonight's linens, Mrs. Margaret Cole, founder of Low Country Heirloom Linens." The applause rose like a wave. Maggie stepped forward under the chandelier's light, catching her silver hair. From the head table, Sloane's smile faltered. Jacob's eyes widened as if seeing his mother for the first time. Maggie bowed her head slightly, then spoke into the microphone. "My mama taught me that stitches hold stories of work, of love, of dignity. Every vine here was sewn with those stories. Tonight, I thank you for letting them breathe again." The room hushed. Avery placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Mrs. Cole's work will now become part of Magnolia Key's permanent heritage collection." Applause again, louder, real this time. At the back of the room, Sloane sat motionless. The fabric she had once kicked beneath a wedding table now shone beneath crystal light, her mother-in-law standing above it radiant. Maggie caught her gaze for a heartbeat, not with anger, but forgiveness. A slow nod. Sloane's eyes glistened. Jacob reached for her hand. The camera pulled wide magnolia petals drifting from the centerpieces, the chandeliers blazing as seamstress framed like royalty. For the first time in decades, Maggie Cole wasn't invisible. She was seen fully finally in the glow of her own making. 3 mornings after the gala, Maggie found a white envelope on her porch, sealed with pale silver wax. The handwriting was delicate, unfamiliar, but the name on the corner stopped her breath. Sloane Whitaker Cole. She carried it inside, sat by the window, where the sunlight made everything honest, and opened it with careful fingers. "Dear Mrs. Cole, I don't know how to begin. I didn't see you for who you were. I only saw the reflection I wanted the world to see. Watching you that night, standing beneath those lights, it was the first time I understood what grace really looks like. You didn't raise just a good man, you raised someone I'm still learning how to deserve. If you'll allow me, I'd like to visit, not to explain, but to listen. Sloane." The paper trembled in Maggie's hands. She closed her eyes, exhaling a quiet prayer. That afternoon, a knock came. Sloane stood on the porch, no makeup, no jewelry, just a simple white blouse and eyes rimmed red. Maggie didn't speak. She only stepped aside. They sat at the kitchen table, the same one once covered in contracts and tears. Between them lay a spool of pale gold thread. "I don't expect forgiveness," Sloane whispered. "But I want to understand how you do it. How you make something so fragile last." Maggie looked at her for a long time. Then she threaded the needle and handed it across. "You start slow," she said softly. "And when the thread knots, you don't throw it away. You just find the patience to untangle it." Sloane's fingers shook as she tried the first stitch. Maggie's hand covered hers, steady and sure. The camera lingered 2 generations, 2 women, one golden thread pulling through white linen like a bridge reborn. Outside, Charleston's evening light poured through the window, soft and forgiving. Inside, every stitch whispered what words couldn't. Some wounds don't close, they mend. 3 months later, the sign went up. Low Country Heirloom Linens. Custom embroidery and classes. Painted in soft ivory against dark mahogany, it hung beneath the wrought iron balcony of a narrow brick building on Trad Street, where bougainvillea spilled like ribbons from the windows above. Maggie stood on the sidewalk, hands dusted with chalk and pride. She'd rented the space with the earnings from the Magnolia Gala, adding a few dollars from her pension. The room inside was small wooden floors, exposed beams, the scent of lemon oil and thread. But to her it felt cathedral large. That morning, her first class filed in Delea, of course, carrying sweet tea and loud opinions. 2 of the girls from the church workshop, and to everyone's surprise, Sloane holding a box of freshly printed brochures. "I figured we could use a proper logo," Sloane said, quietly placing them on the counter. The design shimmered a magnolia blossom intertwined with a golden needle. "I wanted it to match your stitch." Maggie smiled, tears soft but shining. "You got it just right." Throughout the day, the studio filled with the hum of learning laughter, whispered prayers, the snip of scissors, the faint hiss of an old iron. Each woman worked at her hoop, sewing her story into linen. At noon, sunlight spilled through the tall window, turning every thread into gold. Maggie walked among the tables, correcting tension, praising patience, whispering the old words, "Every vine's a prayer." Every mistake, just a story finding its way. When the church bells struck 3, Sloane stood by the doorway watching. "You know," she said softly, "this isn't just a studio. It's a home that keeps growing." Maggie nodded. Homes don't have to be built with brick. Sometimes they're built with people who finally see each other. Outside, Charleston moved at its unhurried pace, tourists laughing cicadas, singing a carriage wheel creaking past. Inside, time felt stitched, still, suspended in light and laughter. The camera rose above the window, showing Low Country Heirloom linens glowing against the sunset. The golden sign swayed gently in the wind, the magnolia symbol, gleaming like a seal of redemption. For the first time, Maggie didn't just belong to her son's story. She belonged to her own. Late one golden afternoon, a young journalist stepped into the Trad Street studio. Her voice carried the polite curiosity of someone raised on coffee and deadlines. "Mrs. Cole, I'm Emma Pierce with the Charleston Chronicle. We're doing a feature on women preserving traditional crafts. Your name's been coming up everywhere." Maggie looked up from her hoop, surprised but calm. "Well, sugar, I've been preserving more than craft. I've been preserving memory." Emma smiled, taking notes as the camera clicked. "You mean the story behind your linens?" Maggie gestured around the room, the shelves of folded fabric, the laughter of students stitching magnolia vines, Sloane helping Delea cut patterns. "Every one of these pieces carries a woman's fingerprint. Some of us were never written about, so we learned to leave our signatures in thread." She led Emma to the display wall-framed samples from her lineage. At the top hung a photograph of Iris Whitaker, smiling behind her sewing table in 1964. Below it, a black and white portrait of Maggie's mother, and beneath that, one of Maggie herself, needle midair eyes bright with purpose. Emma's pen stopped. "Whitaker? That's your husband's family, isn't it?" Maggie's smile was small, but certain. "It's my family, too. The blood that sewed those gowns still runs through my hands. Funny, isn't it? We worked for Charleston's finest for generations, and now our names are finally on the door." Emma swallowed, visibly moved. "May I quote that?" Darlin' Maggie said softly, "You can stitch it on your headline if you like." They laughed, but her eyes glistened. The next week, the article appeared, "The Women Who Sewed Charleston's Soul 3 Generations One, Golden Thread." Photographs filled the page, Maggie teaching children at their hoops, Sloan labeling finished sets, and the framed portrait of Iris watching from above. Within days, orders flooded in from across the South. Weddings museums, even a request from the state governor's mansion to recreate Iris Whittaker's 1964 pattern. But it wasn't fame that made Maggie weep that night. It was when Jacob stopped by after work, holding the paper. "Mom," he said quietly, "I showed this to my office today. Everyone said you're a legend." Maggie smiled, brushing his cheek. Legends are just people who kept going when no one noticed. He leaned down, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "I see you now." The camera lingered on the newspaper, the headline glowing beneath the lamplight. Behind it, Maggie sat by the window, sewing one last magnolia vine, while the twilight faded into indigo. Each stitch shone like memory, made visible a golden thread, pulling 3 women, 3 lifetimes into one unbroken story of dignity, patience, and quiet fire. The Charleston Heritage Honors were held that December in the Grand Hall of the Old Maritime Museum, chandeliers glowing like captured moons and magnolia garlands draped along the balconies. The theme this year, Hands That Built the South. Maggie had received the letter weeks earlier, an invitation to be honored for outstanding cultural preservation. But the last line made her breath catch. "We invite Ms. Iris Whittaker as guest of honor and inspiration for the evening." And now, as the lights dimmed and the orchestra softened, Maggie stood backstage smoothing the navy dress she'd worn the night of the gala. This time, though, her hands didn't tremble. The curtain parted. A ripple of applause moved through the crowd as Avery Shaw announced, "Tonight we celebrate the women whose artistry shaped Charleston's soul, from Iris Whittaker's gowns to Margaret Cole's modern revival." 2 spotlights found them Iris in her wheelchair, wrapped in silver lace she'd sewn herself decades ago, and Maggie standing tall beside her. Maggie knelt gently, placing her hand over Iris's. "We made it, Miss Iris," she whispered. The elder woman chuckled, voice soft but sure. "Child, we've been making it since the first stitch." The audience rose in a standing ovation. From the front row, Jacob held Sloane's hand, pride written all over his face. When Maggie's eyes found theirs, Sloane mouthed, "Thank you." Avery stepped forward, presenting them with a framed tapestry, a single magnolia stitched in gold, surrounded by their initials, IWMCSC. "This," Avery said, "is more than art. It's inheritance, living proof that grace once forgotten can be restored." As the orchestra swelled, Maggie motioned for Sloane to come on stage. Sloane hesitated, then climbed the steps, her heels echoing through the hall. Maggie handed her a spool of golden thread. "Finish the vine," she said softly. Sloane's voice trembled. "I don't know how." "Then let me show you." Maggie guided her hand, the camera tightening on their fingers as the needle passed through the cloth gold gleaming under the lights. The hall fell silent, watching 3 generations bound by one act of creation, the teacher, the heir, the learner. The thread glided looping through the magnolia petal, completing the circle. The audience exhaled as some wiping tears, others clapping through them. Maggie smiled, whispering, "Every vine's a prayer. And this one's for all the women who kept sewing when nobody looked." Iris squeezed her hand, whispering, "Now they're looking, baby." And they see. Cameras flashed, applause thundered. In that light, Maggie didn't see fame or reward. She saw her mother's kitchen, the old rocking chair, the first piece of fabric she ever touched. She saw time folding gently on itself, stitching the past to the present. The shot widened Iris in her silver gown, Maggie radiant beside her, Sloane at her side, 3 women framed in a wash of gold. Outside, Charleston's night hummed with cicadas and river wind. Inside, History healed itself with a single shining thread. And as the curtain fell, Maggie Cole closed her eyes and whispered, "For every hand that ever stitched unseen, this one's for you." The morning after the ceremony, Charleston woke soft and golden. The river shimmered like silk under the rising sun. In her small Trad Street apartment above the studio, Maggie Cole sat by the window, wrapped in a shawl the color of early light. The air still carried the faint perfume of magnolia blossoms from the night before. On her lap rested a letter, thick cream paper sealed in blue wax. She dipped her pen into the inkwell and began to write her script, careful and steady. "Dear Miss Iris, I wanted to thank you again for last night. When the lights hit our hands, I swear I could feel every woman who ever sewed in silence smiling through us. Mama, you, me, even Sloane, who's learning fast and laughing now when the needle pricks her finger. It feels like the thread came home." She paused, looking out the window at the street below. The studio sign swung gently in the morning breeze, Low Country heirloom linens. Through the glass, she could already see Delia unlocking the front door, humming a gospel tune, while Sloane arranged fabric bolts in the window display. 2 little girls from the neighborhood waited at the steps, their sewing kits clutched to their chests. "Funny thing about freedom," she continued. "It doesn't come loud. It slips in quiet like light through lace. It's the moment you stop waiting to be seen and realize you were shining all along. You once told me every vine's a prayer. I think I finally understand prayers aren't always answered. Sometimes they're lived." Her pen hovered. Then she signed, "With love, Maggie." She sealed the letter and set it beside her teacup, meaning to mail it that afternoon. The clock ticked softly, not rushing her, just marking the rhythm of a life, finally her own. Outside, church bells began to ring. The girls' laughter drifted up from the street. Maggie stood smoothing her skirt and looked around her home, the framed photos, the golden thread glinting in the sun, the silence that no longer hurt. It was the silence of peace, of purpose, of a woman who had learned to live for herself without losing her tenderness. She whispered to the empty room, "I'm seen now, Iris. Not because they looked harder, because I finally did." The camera pulled back through the window. Maggie descending the stairs, unlocking the studio door. The sign swinging gently as the morning light spilled inside. Fade out on her voice, soft. "Certain, eternal, every vine's a prayer. And this one keeps growing." How did this story touch you? Tell us in the comments and rate it from 1 to 10. If it moved your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Tap the so you won't miss our next emotional story. And before you go, click on the end screen to discover more powerful, heartwarming tales waiting just for you. See you in the next story.